Stephen, Will, and I have a lot of great things to talk with you all about today. And I'm going to start talking about the Better Choice Gambling Specific Treatment Programs in the state of Connecticut. So we only have an hour with you today, but my contact information is here. If you have any questions on any of the content we discussed, if you would like the slides, just reach out to me and I will happily send them to you. So as we think about the treatment programs, we have to start with how everything was created and the history behind the Better Choice Gambling Treatment Programs in the state of Connecticut. Like anything in our larger field of behavioral health services, advocacy is just so important. And that was no different than gambling in the state of Connecticut. We were very fortunate that we had one of the early pioneers in the field from our state, Dr. Marvin Steinberg. And Marvin was a staunch advocate for this work. And in 1980, he founded the Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling, which was one of the first affiliates of the National Council on Problem Gambling within our country. As time went on, the following year, Marvin continued his advocacy efforts, and he helped to create the department that I currently reside in, Problem Gambling Services, which offered state government treatment for Connecticut, for those that were having challenges with problem gambling or gambling disorder. And at the time, gambling disorder was identified as pathological gambling. And so what had happened was that Problem Gambling Services was almost like the traveling clinical department, where they would go throughout the state to offer services for clients that were having challenges with gambling-related issues. And with our work, peer recovery supports was always a part of the process, from answering the helpline for the Connecticut Council to going off with the clinicians, with the program director of Problem Gambling Services to offer that care. So that lived experience, that peer related services was always a part of the treatment process from the beginning. So as time went on, Problem Gambling Services became more of the administrator. And what had happened in the 90s, there was additional funding that was allocated through the Chronic Gamblers Rehabilitation Fund. And treatment was offered through the 5 regions of the state of Connecticut. So as we see it today, there are 5 Better Choice Gambling treatment programs that are available for clients within the region of the state where they reside. And how it looks today is this is the criteria here. So we offer funding of $261,000 per program. Within that funding, we ask for some of the following criteria to be upheld at a minimum, and that each program has a licensed clinical program manager. Now, I know license in the state of Connecticut might be different than what it looks like in the state of Minnesota, but what we're asking for this program manager is to be somebody that's either a licensed alcohol and drug counselor, a licensed professional counselor, licensed clinical social worker, or marriage and family therapist, because this program manager has a small caseload, among other responsibilities of overseeing the program. Clinically, we ask that there is 1.5 employees that are available, and that can be made up on what works best for the agency. So whether it's 1 full-time clinician and 1 part-time clinician, or whether it's 3 part-time clinicians, there's flexibility there. But what we ask is that the clinician is licensed to provide care and that they're an international certified gambling counselor or working towards this credential. What the structure is also having at least a part-time peer recovery support. You know, as historically peers were part of the process from the beginning, it's such an integral part of our treatment process. So we ask that 40% of the time of our peer counselors is done through community outreach. For those that are newer to this work, we're not at the level of parity with gambling disorder as we see currently with substance use disorder. So there's a lot of time that's spent on raising awareness, on doing presentations like we're doing today, whether it's through the statewide conferences, whether it's through local organizations. That outreach is really important to the work. And 60% of the time is towards clinical care, where our peer counselors have individual sessions with clients. They may be a part of a group with clients, but the work and the lived experience is just so important to the overall health and care of our clients that it's just mandatory, really, for the most part, for clients to be providing that, to be seeing peer counselors as part of the treatment process. Our recovery supports are also working towards getting credentials, mental health and addiction related, willingness to speak publicly, the advocacy efforts, whether it's through outreach or whether it's through testifying on legislative hearings, is certainly helpful when we look towards expansion, as we recently did have expansion in Connecticut to allow sports betting, online gambling, and online lottery. we were able to have funding allocated for treatment, for awareness, prevention, and research because of the efforts of our peers, our nonprofit partner, the Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling, and other key stakeholders within our field. Having lived experience is something that's very important within the role, and also being familiar with the local community resources for individuals that need more than just that better choice treatment. They may need the 12-step care. They may need some of the recovery community centers within the state, but there's not just one pathway. We want to be able to provide what's going to be most beneficial to the client needs. And, as you all know, for clinicians that I'm speaking to out there, not everybody's the same. So we want to help meet our clients where they're at. And then the final slide I'm going to talk about before I turn things over to Stephen and Will is just some additional criteria that we're seeing. So there's different modalities of treatment, excuse me, whether it's individual, family, group, medication management, whether it's through an APRN or a psychiatrist. We talked about peer support, having ability for brief interventions for somebody that might not be ready for treatment at that point, and after-hour crisis calls, whether somebody's calling our Connecticut helpline or is looking for support after hours, to be able to have that care available for our clients. And when we look at level of care, the Better Choice programs offer outpatient, intensive outpatient, and residential services. The Better Choice program that Stephen is a part of is our only residential program in the state of Connecticut. I'm sure Stephen will talk more about that. We also ask that if somebody is reaching out for help, that calls are offered within 24 hours and an appointment is made within 48 hours. It's really important that if somebody is working through those challenges, that we offer that support as soon as we can. As I mentioned on the last slide, outreach is so important that we ask that the providers offer at least 4 community outreach events per year, at least 1 during Problem Gambling Awareness Month. And, it's fair to say that our providers go well beyond that 4. And then involvement in stakeholder meetings, whether it's administrative, whether it's building capacity within the region through our gambling awareness teams, and coming together as a statewide group on a quarterly basis, having that involvement. It's been such a crucial part of our work, and there's such dedication within our peer supports, within our clinical team. Even though we may be small in numbers, the effort is really profound within the state. So with that, I want to pass things over to Stephen to contribute further.
Thanks, Fred. Great job.
Okay, if you can stop sharing your screen, Fred, and then I will share. There we go. Okay, Stephen, take it away.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Susan. Good morning, everyone. As Susan said, I'm Stephen Matos, and I work for the Better Choice program here in Connecticut. So I've been actually doing this work going on 9 years. I've been with my current agency for 5 years. So this presentation that I have, I just took a few slides from a larger presentation. As you can see, this is a whole peer support model of outpatient gambling treatment. So I'm just going to hit on the highlights of importance of peers in gambling work. So a couple of things I want to talk about are just identifying the importance of persons in recovery as part of the helping process with persons with a gambling disorder and persons affected, and just kind of identify the impact that peers have had on those in our Better Choice program, some of the outcomes that we've had. So, and one of the things that we are involved in is integrating the individuals that we work with into self-help groups outside of our gambling program, kind of bridging the gap to the recovery community, whether it's Gamblers Anonymous, Gam-Anon, AA, Al-Anon, Smart Recovery. We have a couple of our recovery organizations like CCAR, Connecticut Community for Addiction Recovery, which is actually, they do trainings nationwide for peer support, and Advocacy Unlimited. These are all peer-based and peer-led organizations, different pathways of recovery, as Fred talked about in our program. So just a little bit about what is peer support. Someone with lived experience, whether it's from a gambling side or a person affected side. I kind of cover both in my role. I ask them to pay me double for that, but they don't. Anyway, anyway, it's really great work. And one of the things we do see in our work, it's not just the gambler itself, but we do work with a lot of family members, and so having persons affected in the peer role is really critically important, that work we do too. And again, providing that link to outside services besides the gambling treatment programs. And again, peers are more focused on health and wellness. We work with individuals on that, and long-term recovery. Helping them build that support network and recovery network so they can continue their recovery when they do leave treatment. Just one of the things about our Better Choice programs in Connecticut, they're open-ended. People come to our program. It's not like they come for 8 weeks of an IOP and 4 weeks of relapse prevention. Our programs are open-ended, so people can come to our program as long as they want. One of the reasons that is for it, because the recovery community in gambling is so small that our peers actually can stay engaged with clients for many years, run recovery groups, and provide some folks just come to the Better Choice program for the recovery. We've had clients 14, 15, 16 years in our Better Choice programs. So we provide that recovery support. Our peers can provide that recovery support, ongoing, open-ended type of thing. So another big need for for peers is that helping them through that financial challenges that they face, helping them do a budget, work with them on the financial issues that they encounter as far as their gambling addiction. Oftentimes that financial boat anchor that they come in with is a huge is difficult for them. And so one of our roles is to try to help them overcome that, help them set up a budget, maybe even open their mail with them, open their bills, and just kind of walk them through it and help them through that, because it can be very overwhelming. And the other thing is the stigma that goes with the gambling addiction. We see a lot, that folks come in, it's very hard for them to talk about their gambling, the shame and the guilt that goes with it. So when you have someone with lived experience there talking about their own stuff, it makes them feel not alone and open up more. So, and again, Fred touched on the Better Choice model. Again, I'll just skip over this. But our Better Choice program does recognize the importance of peers in ongoing and long-term recovery as it relates to gambling addiction and persons affected. And again, one of the things we do, we're fully integrated into the program, all aspects of the program, whether it's at staff meetings, treatment team meetings, and just being the face of hope for the folks that come in. Again, they come in with this financial devastation, maybe family. It's not just money, but family issues. They're the devastation that that's brought on their families as a result of their addiction. So being the face of hope is a huge thing. Been there and done that, and the face of recovery is really important. And so let me see. And again, involvement of every area I kind of touched on earlier. Staff meetings, clinical rounds, meet with clients from the beginning of their treatment to the end. We have our own caseloads if need be. We teach and train staff at other programs about gambling, and oftentimes provide insight to even gambling clinicians on just as a person in recovery from gambling, providing into that mindset of the gambler, the thinking process, and how they think about what can go on is related to gambling. A lot of training, as Fred touched on, outreach, going around the state. We talked a lot of substance use programs where we do gambling education and the risks of gambling, and oftentimes we identify a lot of folks with significant gambling issues that are in substance use programs, because we see a high rate of co-occurring issues with approximately almost 50% of people with substance use issues have significant gambling challenges. So, and then we also aid in clients wanting to give back. If someone, give back. One of the pathways. You can skip this slide. One of the pathways, recovery is Gamblers Anonymous. But one of the things we see in Gamblers Anonymous, it's really hard for folks to give back. Not a lot of speaking opportunities. So we provide opportunities with our folks in recovery if they want to speak at a training or a Problem Gambling Awareness Month event. We give them opportunities. We have a speakers bureau We train them how to craft their story of recovery. And if they want to, they can certainly speak at trainings and other events. And we kind of incentivize it for them a little bit. And we provide activities for persons in recovery. We run groups, financial counseling. We're available after hours on a work cell phone. If they just, they're having challenges or they're feeling triggered, they can text us or contact us after hours. We provide other things, activities, like maybe we schedule activities, picnics, ball games, things like that for them to take part in. We actually testify, we can help them, we've testified at trials for some of our clients on the nature of gambling addiction, speaking on their behalf, and support family members of those with a gambling issue. Individual counseling, again, I am teaching and training. Some of these slides are a little redundant. So, so here's just a little slide here on the integration of some of the treatment outcomes with, this is a really important slide. As far as just an in-house program study back in 2015, 33 clients are discharged from the program services. Of those, 24 discharges are considered successful discharges. Peer counselors have regular involvement, monthly or more often, with 18 or 24 of these clients. Average length of engagement in services for these clients is 607 days. Average length of engagement in services for those without regular peer involvement is 402 days. So you can see over 200 more days in involvement in the program where peers are involved. So that's a pretty significant increase in involvement in treatment and recovery when peers are involved. So that's just, I know there's not a lot of research in this with gambling, but that's just some pretty great in-house data from our program. And again, one of the things that peers, again, just wrap it up with, the isolating nature of the gambling addiction, lack of a lot of self-help options with gambling. We see even in Connecticut with all the gambling we have a small amount of Gamblers Anonymous meetings in this state. So it's really hard to find for people with gambling addiction to find support outside in the community. Even some states, they don't even have a Gamblers Anonymous meeting or very limited resources. So, again, bridging the gap to the recovery community and providing that additional support besides 12-step programs or other type of programs. Again, lack of intensive inpatient and outpatient options. Certainly in Connecticut, we're kind of ahead of the curve as far as the rest of the country. We do have great better choice programs. We have 5 of them. We actually have inpatient treatment at my program in Danbury, one of our sites in Danbury, where people can go inpatient for gambling treatment 7 to 10 days. It's more of a respite from gambling, 7 to 10 days. They get some gambling specific treatment, kind of help them break that cycle of uncontrolled gambling, maybe help them go through that little withdrawal period that they may experience from gambling. And then when they're discharged from there, oftentimes they're discharged into another better choice program where they in the one in the area where they come from. And again, gambling's pretty normalized in our culture. It's out there every day. So we kind of have to push back with that. It's in the news every day now with the expansion of gambling. So we're out there every day in the community talking about the risks of gambling. So pretty much that's it. That's a quick version of my longer presentation. And certainly if anybody has questions after, please feel free to reach out to me.
So Will, why don't you tell us a little bit about the program in Maryland?
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here with you all today. Again, my name is Will Hinman. I'm a certified peer recovery sports specialist and registered peer supervisor for the Maryland Center of Excellence on Problem Gambling. We have a wonderful team. We have 5 peers total that cover the state. Our program is very similar to what Stephen and Fred described, and the statistics and data sounded very similar as well. So I could totally relate. We spend probably about 40% of the time out in the community as well. We attend community events, fairs, recovery events. Like you all, I do a number of recovery presentations in recovery centers for clients that may be in there for substance abuse and mental health issues, but just to educate them on the risks of gambling and problem gambling. That way they don't slip in the trap of substituting one addiction for the other. And if nothing else, they leave there educated on the risks of gambling, and they know the resources that are available to them in the community. And if they do happen to relate as having a gambling problem, which isn't rare. A lot of times 2 or 3 will relate to having some sort of gambling problem. I can talk to them after the presentation and provide them with my number. We're really proud of the way we were able to adapt during the pandemic. Like Stephen said, there was very few GA meetings available going into the pandemic. Fortunately, our local group made meetings available daily on the telephone, which was really, really helpful. That along with telehealth treatment allowed me to immediately get them engaged into a number of recovery resources. So it's very similar. Everything is very similar to what you all said. So I'm looking forward to this discussion, definitely.
Thanks, Will.
Okay, great. Thanks, Will. So I'm going to be very upfront. I have an ulterior motive for bringing us all together, and I let you guys know that as we were forming the program, but we do not have peer recovery specialists as part of our problem gambling services. And so I believe this is part of the integration of care that will certainly help those on their road to recovery. And so you've kind of touched upon the benefits of the peer program, but let's talk about some of the details in terms of how Connecticut and Maryland came to adopt these programs. That how much convincing did you have to do at the state level to get these programs initiated? Fred, maybe you can answer that.
Sure, Susan, I could jump in with that. For us, we were very fortunate that peer supports were part of the initial philosophy. I think because our program has been around for so long, we're one of the oldest continuously funded treatment programs throughout the nation. I was lucky when I came into my role. This was the structure that was in place. And for our role, it was implementing it, continue to put it out there, continue to provide the services that would be most beneficial for clients that were in need. So it helped that the framework was already there, that peers were involved throughout the whole process, whether it was through the state funded treatment or whether it was through our council. So within Connecticut, 2 of the larger providers of our type of care is us through problem gambling services with our Better Choice Network. We also have recovery-based services as well that Stephen oversees, and the Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling. So it helps that when you come into a role that structure, that philosophy is already in there, that for us, it's just bringing it out there, letting folks know that part of the treatment process is not just meeting with a clinician, it's having somebody with the lived experience. When I was doing my direct clinical work, it was always so helpful when clients would say, well, Fred, do you know what it's like? Have you had that experience? And myself not being in recovery, I would always have the opportunity to say, it might not be me, but you have the opportunity to meet with some of our peer staff here, like Steve and like Will, that can provide that lived experience and support. So, I think there's a little bit of 2 cents for me there. Steve and Will, some of your thoughts.
Stephen, how did you come to, obviously you were a person in recovery. How did you make the transition to, and talk a little bit perhaps about the training you had to go through as well?
Sure. Yeah, that was actually part of the larger presentation, but yeah, great question. So I retired, like I said, from the state. I was a person in long-term recovery about 25 years at the time. Before I started working here, there was a friend of mine who was working as a peer counselor, and she says, I think this would be good for you. So she dropped my name. I had the good fortune of getting a job as a peer. And, going forward, there wasn't, peers. One of the things I encountered was people were kind of skeptical of peers when I first started. Some peers, because there was some peers, there was a few peers over the years. There were some really good ones, but then there was some that were a little, had some issues. And so I had to earn my stripes, so to speak, as far as in my work. And so I didn't see a lot of clients in the beginning, but one thing in Connecticut, they have so much training for gambling and, Gambling 101, brain biology, all kinds of peer-based programs like recovery coaching programs, recovery sports specialist trainings. And so I was really able to immerse myself in the training aspect. But I will say this, even after all of my years in recovery, coming into this field, I felt like I was starting all over again, because I had to learn about all the different pathways of recovery. All I knew was, GA and Gam-Anon. That was all I knew, and AA, obviously, but that's all I knew. So coming into this field, you kind of have to learn to embrace, multiple pathways and learn about those multiple pathways. I think that was the number one thing that I had to learn, that 12-step isn't the only way to recover. That's all I knew, but I had to learn. And there were programs like Recovery Coach Academy that I attended where I was able to learn about those different types of things, which are really, really important, because not everybody is a GA person. Not everybody's a Gam-Anon person. So, when someone walks through the door, you really have to have that skill set to be able to engage those persons. So.
And Will, what about you? What kind of, in terms of the training that Maryland provided for you and your entry into the program?
I guess let's talk about, a little bit of my story and the entry and what motivated me to want to be a peer. So I hit my bottom from gambling and alcoholism at the end of 2013, and I was in a 28-day rehab center. I felt very alone. There was no other gamblers, or at least anyone that admitted they had a gambling problem in there. And the way I was introduced to the center was they had a gentleman by the name of Michael Rosen, who was a counselor and a helpline coordinator. And I don't believe there was not a peer program in existence at that time, but he came in and shared. He did have lived experience as both as a disorder gambler and an alcoholic. So I was able to connect with him on that level, and he lined it up for me to go to outside GA meetings twice a week. They had a member of GA come and pick me up from the rehab and take me to 2 GA meetings a week. And, very early on, I really had a strong desire to work with gamblers, because I remember how misunderstood I felt in treatment. And I just felt so alone. Even though I was an alcoholic, I just didn't feel like anybody understood me, because the gambling is what drove me to my bottom. That drove me to the point of being suicidal. I lost everything, and so I called Michael, I guess about a year into recovery, and I asked him about a job at the center. He said, unfortunately, there's no state resources available right now. I wish I could hire you. And then I called again, I guess another year later, and I talked to one of their peers, Ken Wilson, and I was calling him actually because a good friend of mine, who actually is now our Eastern Shore peer, his mom has struggled with gambling addiction for 45 years. As a matter of fact, he still has her on a harm reduction program. She plays poker literally 15 hours a day still, and she's in her late 70s. So I told him, we got to talk, and he said, well, you're in luck. We actually are hiring peers now. And I think at that time they had one other peer employed, and I applied and I got the job, and it was just a dream come true. So as far as the trainings, it's so many incredible trainings that we take, just on self-care and awareness, boundaries, and things of that nature. They allowed us a year to get certified. So I was able to work as a non-certified peer with the requirement that I had to be certified within a year, and just attended, trainings during my work time. And it's been incredible, having a job in alignment with my recovery, where I'm able to share my lived experience to help others is a dream come true for me, and allows me to live with my past. Because I think if I wasn't able to use my story to help others, I don't know how I'd live with it. I don't know how I'd live with the regrets. So it's been an amazing experience.
So both you and Stephen are state employees as well within the programs?
No, I work for a state funded program. I'm a retired state employee, so I can't work for the state again, but it's a state. Fred is the state, and his agency is our funder. So we get our funds from the state, so we are state funded, but we do collaborate on numerous things like trainings, outreach, and things like that. I just want to comment a couple things too. I know I touched on stigma in our presentation, but one thing I wanted to talk about. So as I mentioned, I was in recovery for many years before I started working in this field. I talked, everybody knew that I didn't drink. I had many friends at AA. People at work knew I went to AA. But gambling, I never talked outside of my recovery community. I never talked about my gambling recovery. So even when I came into this field, I started working in this field, people would ask me, well, what are you doing now? And I'm like, well, I work for this agency, this nonprofit agency, whatever. And well, what do you do there, right? They would ask me like all these questions, and then I say, well, I work at a gambling treatment program. And they, well, how do you know about that, right? So I had to like tell on myself, and I really had a hard time with that. So, but it kind of brought me out of that. So what my point is, the stigma associated with gambling, this actually helped me with talking about it more. And I realized that with the individuals I work with, how important that shame and that guilt and that stigma is. It's so intense with the folks that come in to gambling treatment. I think it's a really big thing that we have to address, because we do see with gambling addiction that, the highest rates of suicide out of any other addiction. So that shame and guilt that goes with it is really needs to be talked about and addressed. And the other thing is that in Connecticut, I've actually worked the helpline for the Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling. So they employ peers on the helpline. So after hours, peers answer the phone call. So I have worked that for quite a few months. And so I think peers, on the helpline are really important, because people are, when they're making that helpline call, they're desperate. They, for them to pick up that phone, they're struggling. And so to have someone with that lived experience on the other end to help them out, that's another valuable role, I think, of peers on the helpline. So
talk a little bit more about that in terms of the interaction that you have with somebody on the phone. So they've called the helpline. Presumably they are in some sense of a crisis, because to get them to call that number, they're feeling that crisis. Not without revealing details, obviously, but generally, what transpires in the call for you?
basically, someone will call up, and it's just for average. I say, so I ask them their name. I says, well, tell me what's going on. And they'll share what's going on with themselves. And I'm like, and I'll say, okay, well, then I'll just kind of qualify myself as a person in recovery. I kind of, empathize with them, say I'm a person in long-term recovery from gambling, just to kind of, so they know that I have that, been there, done that thing. So they know I know what they're talking about. They'll go on a little bit about their story. I'll offer them some resources. I'll actually, ask them, if they're feeling suicidal. I have to kind of ask that question. Get some demographic information through oftentimes, we have a checklist of questions we have to ask, but it's oftentimes I can get a lot of that information just in basic conversation. Do you have family to help? Is there someone you have a loved one that's involved, that's willing to help you, or do they know about it? Everybody's kind of different, but just knowing that they have someone that lived experience kind of makes them open up more. And then depending on where, where they're at and what they want to do as far as, supports, we offer them different, if they don't want to go to treatment, well, I'll give them some Gamblers Anonymous resources type thing. If they want treatment, I'll give them some resources, and then I'll follow up with the council, and I'll give them the numbers to call in their area, and then I'll notify the council of our call. I'll follow up with that individual the next day, make sure, and we try to get them in, if they do want treatment, we try to get them in within 24 to 48 hours into our program. So there's really good interaction more often than not. And for family members too. A lot of times, family members are calling for their loved one, and maybe their family member doesn't want it, maybe the gambler doesn't want to come in, but we'll offer them their own, like, you can come in and talk. We'll give you some education on gambling addiction, how best to support your loved one, and maybe talk about your own issues. And again, our programs are at no out-of-pocket expense for our gambling treatment in Connecticut. So we'll just explain that too, the level of services that we do provide.
So Will, what's a typical occurrence for you? So you're off hours as well in terms of picking up the helpline, which,
Yes.
So how often are you called in the early morning hours? And
It's a lot of times in the late night hours, and I'll be honest, a lot of times I don't answer the call. A lot of times at 3 in, but I'll call them back and give them a little bit of time to sleep, and call them back around 10 a.m. the next day. And there's a lot of evening calls, 4 or 5 o'clock. Not a whole lot of early morning calls, but it's usually the evening or late night hours, and it's very similar to what Stephen described. The warm transfer, and the helpline's got very, very good at encouraging them to talk to me, and that I understand I have lived experience. They warm transfer them to me, and I will, like Stephen said, I'll share a little bit of my lived experience, and you can almost hear that breath, like they know I understand, and they just start opening up, and we start having a really engaging conversation. And like I said earlier, you know, there's a lot of virtual resources available. So, you know, the first thing I'll do is ask them if they're interested in the no-cost treatment and find them a counselor that's close to them, and I can warm transfer them at the end of the call to them if they like, and get them immediately in contact with the counselor. And a lot of times if they'll call at 4 or 5 o'clock, there's a 7 o'clock telephone meeting waiting there. And I'll say, hey, if you want, there's a 7 o'clock meeting tonight. I'll even jump on there with you. And a lot of times I'll attend their first meeting with them. And you can just hear the relief on those calls. And then after the meeting, that GA group gets them a virtual phone list. So they have a bunch of phone numbers and they immediately feel like they're one of the group. And then I also, you know, I'll email them a follow-up email with all the resources too, anything that I think would be helpful to them, all the meeting information, their provider's name and number, and any other, you know, consumer credit counseling, the GAM-BAM, anything I think could be helpful to them, I'll email them to them so they have it in front of them on paper. And we too also partner up with the Maryland Coalition of Families. So it's a family member, we can also provide them with support. And if I know there's a husband or wife or spouse or child involved, I offer them Maryland Coalition of Families information as well in case their family members need some support.
Terrific. We did have a question in the audience wondering, what does your recruitment look like in each state for peer recovery specialists? So Will, do you want to talk about that?
For peers?
Mm-hmm.
So right now we have 5 peers. We're fully staffed at this time. As a matter of fact, we're only, I think, budgeted to have 4, but we were able to get 5 approved. So we have 1 that covers Baltimore City and then 4 others that recover the main remainder of the state. So we are fully staffed at this time. We're preparing for the sports gambling rollout probably at the end of next year. So that may require us to have, you know, 1 or 2 more peers. We don't know yet. We're waiting to see how that goes.
Okay. And Stephen, and now that sports gambling has started in Connecticut, just what, a month ago or a few weeks ago?
Yeah, like 2 months ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're like Will said, we're fully staffed in Connecticut at our 5 Better Choice programs. We have a peer employed at each one. I kind of do a double role. There's a separate grant for gambling recovery support. So I provide recovery opportunities for people that, you know, that are in recovery from gambling, not just necessarily but they don't have to be in the Better Choice program. They could be a part of the Speakers Bureau. I have scholarships for Recovery Coach Academy at CCAR if people want to be peers. So I do a lot of community. I mean, I work closely with the gambling recovery community. So even though someone may not be in Better Choice program, we're with we talked about the expansion of gambling. I could see, you know, with more funding, we're going to have to expand our role. Or get more peers. So I actually have a couple of people that I'm grooming that are in the pipeline where they're kind of in a good position where they've had all the trainings. They have Recovery Coach Academy, you know, gambling 101 trainings. They've been part of our Speakers Bureau. They've been speaking. So they're kind of in a transition where they may be retiring soon. So they'll be able to, you know, move right into that peer role when ready. But it's a really hard thing to do to find peers, to develop peers. It's a very difficult role. To find people like Will and myself. There's not a lot of us to do the work that we do, and it requires a lot of training. Yeah, but we're working on it, you know. And
yeah, so Fred, do you foresee, you know, now that expansion in gambling has occurred in Connecticut, what are you discussing at the state level in terms of how this may be approached strategically?
Great question, Susan. So we are looking at with some of the expanded funding to provide additional supports for recovery supports, whether it's within our programs or expanding the program that Stephen was talking about, the recovery support services throughout the state. So it's something that we are absolutely looking at. You know, as Stephen and Will just so eloquently just described, the role is so important. It is so crucial. I mean, I think about some of my past work in substance use where I didn't have a peer counselor that I was working with, the difference that you see when you have somebody with that lived experience. It's almost you offer the clients the full package here. So you have the opportunity to work with the professional treatment, you have the opportunity to work with the professional peer. The skills are there to help you, to help yourself in the best ways that you can. So yeah, absolutely. It's a process we're talking about now. You know, we're discussing with our higher levels of the state on seeing what we can implement moving forward. But that is one of the top things we are exploring. So additional funding for peer recovery supports.
Okay. For those in the audience, we're happy to take some questions if you have some. So just put it in the Q&A. And just looking here. Okay. Nothing so far. Okay. So in Will and Steve, as you see the expansion of gambling happening, what are your thoughts about that, and how you're going to approach that in your work going forward?
Sure. I see our role increasing. Yeah, I think the need for peers, like our role has gotten so big. I mean, what we do, we start, originally peers were just worked within the program themselves, and now our role has expanded to, working with our clients, outreach and training, advocacy, helpline. It's just so much stuff. And I think, being available after hours. And we actually, the past couple months, month or so, we've seen our numbers increase in our program. People that were already gambling, their gambling has increased, and the online gambling has pushed them over the edge. The advertising is just inundated with advertising. So our roles are getting bigger and bigger. As Fred said, they're looking at maybe expanding, getting more help in what we do. But again, it's our roles have.
Oh, you froze up there. Steve, you froze up a little bit. Will, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I agree with Stephen. Our role has become, it's become pretty vital, I think, just increasing awareness, educating the community on the risks of gambling and problem gambling. And also, really encouraging providers to integrate gambling and problem gambling into their current mental health and substance abuse treatment. Because I think, I do feel like we're getting the word out. I think that gambling is starting to become recognized as a serious disorder, and I'm just hopeful that we can continue to educate the community so they understand this is a cutting and baffling addiction. And like Stephen said, the risk of suicide is very, very high with this addiction.
So I'll put you on the spot here with a question from the audience. This person has spent 19 years making sure that gambling does not define them. So how does being a peer resource deflect or minimize that? How does being a peer support specialist not continue to define you as a gambler?
I mean, I think that, when you have to live recovery and be an example of recovery, it really, it helps you as a human being to grow. And it also helps the help seekers that are calling you not define themselves as gamblers. When you can point out their positive traits, and start to, it's a psychic change that occurs. And when you help others to kind of turn that light bulb on and realize that the gambling doesn't define them, it kind of keeps it fresh in you, and that's what keeps my recovery fresh, it really does. And
terrific. So another person asks, what kind of demographics are you noticing in seeking peer support?
I mean, it's all over the state, with us, with there's lottery games everywhere and scratch offs. We get a lot of calls for that. We have 16 bingo halls across the state. So even in Southern Maryland, there's 3 major bingo halls, and I cover Southern Maryland. I also have 2 of the major casinos within my territories. And, and I already get calls from sports gamblers, and it's not even legalized in the state yet. So I can imagine there's going to be an increase in calls once it is, once there is more accessibility to sports.
What about age groups? What are you experiencing?
I'm getting more and more calls from definitely younger clients. with the sports gambling and the gaming. You know, we get a call from some gamers in the esports, which I don't even have a full comprehensive understanding of yet, but we are getting more and more calls. I'm also getting calls from people that say, I don't know if this is gambling or not, but I have a crypto problem. And they're, you know, and the crypto market's open 24/7. So that's a new thing that I'm getting a lot of phone calls about as well. And that's a lot of people a lot of times in their mid-20s too. It's a younger group that's calling. So I'm definitely noticing more calls from the youth, 18
Okay,
to
great.
25 years old.
Stephen, is that true for Connecticut as well? Your age group wise, the calls that you're receiving?
Yes, we see probably the fastest growing group are young males, 18 to 29. We have quite a few in our program. Sorry, I lost my internet. I had to log on my iPhone. I don't know what happened, but apologize for that.
No worries.
Yeah, thank God for the iPhone. But yeah, we do see, we have quite a few young fellas, almost to the point where we were thinking about starting a young men's group, because it really is the hardest group to engage in treatment and for persons to get help. It's very difficult, but we do see an increase with the young males.
Okay.
You know, cryptocurrency. I heard Will mention cryptocurrency. We have an 18-year-old in our program. He's really, that was his form of gambling, and the information we get from him about all his friends are doing it, and all this online casinos with it, and just the nature of it. It's we get some good information, and it's really, there's so many challenges now. So
There are a lot. So another person asks, can you share some examples of feedback that you've received from gamblers that you've worked with?
They certainly, they like the peer role. They like to talk to someone with lived experience. We hear that a lot. They think they value to someone as much as the therapy is important. They do value, from many clients, they do value the lived experience aspect of being someone who's been there and done that. We heard that many times, in our program as far as feedback goes, and they appreciate, what we can do for them. Like we actually, like being able to meet them in the community. I meet a lot of clients, maybe during COVID, they couldn't come in. They wanted to meet someone live, meet them at a coffee shop. So they like the flexibility that they have with the peer, where we can go out in the community and meet. They really appreciate that part of it also, being able to go into the community and meet with them when they wanted to see people live, when maybe maybe they were technologically challenged. They couldn't do Zoom or Microsoft Teams. I could go sit at a picnic table and talk to them somewhere.
Well, I know anecdotally, at least, both of your programs have indicated that people are, because you've got peer support, that people are more likely to enter a treatment program than if they were just calling a helpline, which I think is very encouraging. And we have another question, and Fred, maybe you could chime in on this as well. They want to know how long, roughly, it takes to develop a peer recovery specialist. So what's the actual timeline for training, and from the point of kind of entering into the program to the point where they're launched to actually see clients?
In Maryland, it's about 1 year to get the trainings all done and completed and take the test and become certified. That's a question.
And is that similar in Connecticut?
I think there's similarities there. So, Stephen, you want to? Will and Stephen are doing such a good job. I'll just compliment what you. Go ahead, you go first, and I'm going after you.
No, go ahead. You go first, and I'll go. Go ahead. It's fine. I talk.
All right. He's such a gentleman. Stephen, as you can tell, is such a rock star in Connecticut. It's similar type of fashion as Will's saying. To go through the Recovery Coach Academy for the Connecticut Community for Addiction Recovery, Recovery University. It takes several months there. Our peer counselors have even worked towards the International Certified Gambling Counselor credential. That's mainly there for clinicians, but a lot of our peers also hold that credential. So that takes some time as well. as seeing the amount of clients that you're seeing, sitting for the test, getting the training hours, which is 30 hours if you're going for level 1, 60 if you're going for level 2. So I think, as Will is saying, we see similarities there, but Stephen mentioned it earlier too. Development of our peers, development of our staff is really important to the work that we're doing. We want to continue to offer that continuing education to our providers. So the best we can train folks, that's all open to us, but I'd say anywhere from 6 months to a year is appropriate in Connecticut. Stephen,
And that
anything I missed?
And that training is part of the funding that's set aside in Connecticut?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And I think that's true in Maryland as well, that the training is at no cost to you?
My organization does cover it. There is a cost to some of the trainings, and there's some free trainings. It all varies. You know, with how quick you're trying to get your certification. You can wait for the free trainings to be announced, or you can pay for trainings if you want to get it done sooner. But my organization did cover the trainings for me.
Okay. Well, we have just a few minutes left. Any parting words that you want to leave us with?
Well, just as far as comments, I actually had a slide in my presentation. It said someone wanted to know any comments from clients, and probably more than one client has said this. I know I probably wouldn't have made it without my peer counselor. So a lot of them do value the peer counselor role. But thank you, Susan, for having us today for letting us talk about the importance of our role, in gambling treatment. So.
No, I have a lot of respect for you being on the front line and being an integral part of somebody's recovery. I think it really is an important piece, and I hope that we can move in that direction here in Minnesota, because I see the value, and it's clear from talking to you and knowing the directors of your programs and what you're seeing through the helpline, and those warm transfers, I think, are extremely valuable to somebody who has the courage to reach out for help, because we know that it takes a lot of courage to pick up that phone and ask for help, and also integrating the family, I think, in this process as well, to be able to offer them some assistance, because they're walking that path alongside their spouse or family member, and it can be very lonely. So to have somebody there who has walked the walk and can be in compassion with those people, I think is just a wonderful service to offer. So thank you to you for doing it.